The Concordance drifted in the neutral zone between two empires, its corridors humming with diplomatic tension that never quite resolved into peace or war. David Mercer sat in his quarters at 2300 ship time, reviewing tomorrow's negotiation schedule and trying not to think about how today's resource allocation talks had nearly collapsed when the Veltrian delegation walked out over perceived insult that wasn't actually in the translated text. Junior envoys didn't get to fix those problems. They just got to watch them happen and file reports nobody would read. The knock at his door was quiet, almost hesitant. David assumed someone needed a document signed or had questions about tomorrow's logistics. He opened the door expecting a colleague or maybe security with routine update. Princess Sariel Velkaris stood in the corridor, and she looked terrified. She wasn't wearing ceremonial robes or diplomatic regalia, just simple traveling clothes that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Her silver-blue skin showed stress patterns David had learned to recognize from cultural briefings, darker striations around her eyes and temples that indicated Veltrian physiological response to fear. Her hands were clasped together tightly enough that he could see them trembling. She met his eyes directly, which Veltrian nobility never did with lower-ranking individuals, and asked in careful standard, "May I stay here for the night, human?" David's brain supplied approximately 17 different responses ranging from "this is diplomatically insane" to "are you being threatened right now?" But what came out was, "Are you safe? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm not injured." She glanced down the corridor like she was checking for followers. "But I'm not safe in my quarters tonight. Someone in my delegation." She trailed off, then continued more quietly. "I need somewhere they won't look for me. Your quarters are registered to junior staff. Nobody would think to check here." Every diplomatic protocol David had ever learned screamed that letting her in was a career-ending mistake. He stepped aside. "Come in quickly." Sariel entered with visible relief, though her posture remained tense. She moved immediately away from the door, positioning herself near the far wall like she was calculating escape routes. David sealed the door and activated the privacy lock, then turned to face her properly. "What happened?" She was quiet for a moment, studying his quarters with the kind of detailed attention people gave to unfamiliar spaces when they were trying to avoid eye contact. The room was small, bunk, desk, minimal storage, attached washroom barely large enough to function. Standard junior envoy allocation, not designed for entertaining royalty. "I found a scanner trap in my quarters," she said finally. "Designed to map my biosignature for targeted toxins. Very expensive, very illegal, very effective. Someone with resources and access placed it there while I was at today's negotiations." David processed this with the part of his brain that handled crisis situations. "You need to report this to security. File formal complaint with the Diplomatic Oversight Committee. This is attempted assassination on a neutral vessel, which will turn into diplomatic incident that embarrasses my family, provides my political enemies with leverage, and possibly derails the peace negotiations we've spent 8 months advancing." Sariel turned to face him. "I can't report it officially. Not yet. I need time to investigate who's behind it, to gather evidence, to build a response that doesn't play into their hands. So you need to disappear for a night while you figure out next steps." "Yes, and your quarters are perfect. Nobody knows we have any connection beyond formal diplomatic interactions. Your junior staff, beneath the notice of people plotting against me, they won't think to look here." David sat down in the desk chair because standing made him feel like he was looming over someone who was already frightened. "You can stay, but we need to establish some parameters. 1. I'm not involved in whatever court politics are happening. I'm providing temporary refuge, not joining a conspiracy. 2. If someone tries to breach this door, I'm calling security immediately regardless of diplomatic embarrassment. 3. You need to tell me enough about the situation that I can make informed decisions about our safety. Sariel considered this, her expression cycling through what David was learning to read as Veltrian calculation, weighing risks, assessing trust, determining acceptable disclosure. Finally, she nodded. Fair terms. The situation is. She paused, choosing words carefully. My older brother, Crown Prince Corvith, opposes the peace negotiations. He believes humanity is a temporary threat that will be eliminated in eventual conflict, and that these talks only delay inevitable Veltrian dominance. My sister, Princess Meryl, supports peace but for economic reasons. She sees humans as resources to exploit rather than partners to cooperate with. And you? I've been publicly advocating for genuine alliance. Cultural exchange programs, educational partnerships, shared scientific research. Not just cessation of hostilities, but actual cooperation between our species. She touched her wrist where David now noticed a faint burn mark. This makes me impediment to both factions. My brother wants war, my sister wants exploitative peace, and I want something neither can accept. So killing you solves problems for multiple parties, while being deniable enough to avoid major scandal. I'm third in succession, politically expendable but ideologically inconvenient. She said it with the kind of matter-of-fact tone people used when discussing their own potential murder after accepting it as normal. Your species has no concept of familial politics at this level. Earth eliminated monarchies before reaching the stars. You can't understand what it's like being raised knowing your siblings might kill you for political advantage, and that's considered acceptable within certain parameters. David thought about his own sister back on Earth, who dared him to apply for diplomatic service and then sent encouraging messages during training. Tried to imagine her hiring assassins and couldn't make the concept fit reality. That sounds absolutely terrible, and I'm sorry you live like that. Sariel looked genuinely surprised. That's not a response I expected. Most species express shock or disgust at Veltrian succession politics. You express compassion. Being shocked doesn't help you right now, being safe does. David pulled the spare blanket from his storage compartment. You can have the bunk, I'll take the floor. Doors secured, and if anyone tries unauthorized entry, alarms will sound before they breach the seal. I can't take your sleeping space. That violates every hospitality protocol I know. I'm offering it. That fulfills human hospitality protocols. We'll call it cultural exchange. He set up the blanket as makeshift floor bedding, which looked even less comfortable than it was. Try to rest. Morning shift change is at 0600. You can leave then when corridor traffic is high enough that you won't be noticed specifically. Sariel moved to the bunk but didn't lie down. Instead, she sat on the edge, hands still clasped tightly, looking at David with an expression he couldn't fully parse. Why are you helping me? You've barely spoken to me before tonight. You have no political stake in my survival. Helping me could damage your diplomatic career. Because you knocked on my door asking for help, and you were clearly terrified despite trying to hide it. That's enough reason. That's remarkably simple morality for such a complex political situation. Maybe that's humanity's contribution to galactic politics. Sometimes simple morality works better than complex calculations. They sat in awkward silence for several minutes, the kind that happens when two people who don't know each other are trapped in small space by unusual circumstances. The ship's environmental systems hummed quietly. Somewhere distant, footsteps echoed in the corridor, then faded. Sariel spoke again, her voice softer. I've been watching you during the negotiations. You're always the one fixing problems before they escalate. When our delegation's translation software failed during resource distribution talks, you had backup running before anyone realized there was an issue. When Ambassador Tyrenal's dietary restrictions weren't properly communicated to the galley, you personally ensured appropriate meals were available. You prevent crises that most people never notice almost happened. That's my job. Junior envoys handle logistics and crisis prevention. But you do it without seeking recognition. Most diplomats would leverage those successes for political advancement. You just do the work because it needs doing. David shrugged. Recognition doesn't help as much as actually solving problems. I'm more interested in successful negotiations than personal credit. That philosophy would get you killed in Veltrian court within a week. Good thing I'm not in Veltrian court. Sariel almost smiled. Good thing. She finally lay down on the bunk, though she didn't close her eyes. May I ask you something personal? You're in my quarters at midnight because someone wants to kill you. I think we're past worrying about personal questions. Do humans believe in fate, in predetermined connections between individuals? David considered the question, surprised by its philosophical turn. Some do. I think we make connections through choices and circumstances, and sometimes those feel like fate because they're so unlikely. Why? Because I knocked on your door tonight instead of any other. I could have sought refuge with senior Terran diplomats, with security personnel, with any number of people who would have provided better protection. She turned her head to look at him. But I came here, to someone I barely know, who has no reason to help me, whose quarters are completely inadequate for hosting royalty, and you let me in without hesitation. You needed help. I could provide it. That's not fate, that's opportunity and choice. Perhaps, but it feels like something more than random chance. She was quiet for a moment, then added almost too softly to hear, "Thank you, David Mercer, for your simple morality and inadequate quarters and willingness to help someone who could only bring you trouble." "You're welcome, Princess Sariel. Now try to sleep. I'll keep watch." That's not necessary. Someone wants to kill you and they might track you here eventually. I'm keeping watch. It's not negotiable. She studied him with those three-pupiled eyes that supposedly saw more of the spectrum than human vision, then surrendered to exhaustion. Her eyes finally closed, though her breathing didn't immediately settle into sleep patterns. David could see tension in her shoulders, the way her hands remained clenched even at rest. He settled against the wall, uncomfortable but alert, thinking about Veltrian court politics and assassination plots, and the fact that he just made a decision that would have consequences he couldn't predict. His datapad showed the time. 23:47. 7 hours until morning shift change. 7 hours to keep one frightened alien princess safe from her own family's political machinations. His career was probably over. Ambassador Chen would have extremely pointed questions about why David hadn't reported this through proper channels. The Veltrian delegation would be furious if they discovered their princess had sought refuge with human junior staff. And if Sariel was right about the assassination plot, whoever placed that scanner trap would be looking for her. But she'd knocked on his door asking for help, and he'd let her in. Sometimes the right choice was also the complicated one, and you just had to accept that and deal with the consequences as they came. Around 0300, ship alarms sounded briefly, not full emergency protocol, but the sharp alert that indicated security was investigating something. David checked his datapad and found a coded message from the overnight security coordinator. Sweep of diplomatic quarters following suspicious activity report. All personnel remain in quarters until all clear. Sariel woke at the sound, sitting up quickly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. What's happening? Security sweep. Someone reported suspicious activity. David pulled up the security feed he technically shouldn't have access to, but did because junior envoys who prevented crises needed information channels the official system didn't provide. They're checking all diplomatic quarters, including mine. Especially yours, I'd guess. The all-clear came 20 minutes later, but David noticed something concerning in the security log. Someone had attempted unauthorized access to Sariel's quarters during the sweep, using credentials that technically shouldn't have triggered alarms, but did because of redundant protocols, David had personally recommended to the security team months ago when he'd noticed gaps in their monitoring systems. He made a mental note to never complain about bureaucratic overcaution again, since it had apparently just saved Sariel's life. "Someone tried to access your quarters during the security sweep," he said quietly. "Used forged credentials that would have worked if not for redundant security I helped implement. Your quarters definitely aren't safe." Sariel went very still in the way that meant she was processing information and calculating implications. "They acted faster than I anticipated. Usually assassinations take weeks of planning, multiple attempts, careful timing. This suggests either they have resources I didn't know about, or there are more conspirators than I suspected. Or both. Or both." She stood, smoothing her traveling clothes, shifting from frightened refuge seeker to political operator in front of his eyes. "I can't return to my quarters. But my absence will be noticed when I don't appear for morning meal at 0700. Questions will be asked." David thought fast, running through diplomatic protocols and creative interpretations thereof. Emergency Cultural Exchange Program. "I'm a junior envoy studying Veltrian customs. You're providing personal instruction as part of your observer duties. We file the paperwork retroactively. Claim it was arranged privately to avoid bureaucratic delays that might have prevented the exchange entirely. It's technically within both our authorities." That's creative interpretation of diplomatic protocols to the point of fiction. That's working within the system to keep you alive, while we figure out what to do about people trying to kill you. Can you support the fiction if questioned? Sariel considered, and David watched her shift fully into the political persona she'd been trained to inhabit. "Yes, I can claim this was my initiative, reaching out directly to junior human staff to build grassroots understanding rather than relying solely on high-level negotiations. It fits my established positions on cultural exchange. My delegation won't be pleased, but they can't officially object without seeming to oppose the reconciliation they're supposedly supporting." "Will they try to kill you anyway?" "Probably, but less openly. Assassination during official diplomatic exchange would create scandal even Veltrian politics couldn't ignore easily. I'll have some protection through visibility and documentation." She straightened her posture, adopting the regal bearing she'd temporarily abandoned in fear. "I'll need to appear in public this morning looking confident, not hiding. Can you escort me to the observation deck? It's public space with witnesses, and I can be discovered there having spent the night in meditation rather than my quarters." "That works, but Sariel," he used her name without the title and she didn't correct him. "We need to actually address the assassination plot, not just avoid it temporarily. You can't live like this indefinitely." "I know, but I need time to investigate, to identify everyone involved, to build a political response that doesn't just get me killed more efficiently." She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "David, you've saved my life twice now. Once by providing shelter, once by monitoring security protocols I didn't even know existed. I owe you debts I cannot easily repay under any system of honor I know. You don't owe me anything. I helped because it was right, not because I expected payment or political favors." That simple morality again. But she said it with something that might have been fondness. "It's going to get you killed or make you a legend, possibly both." They left his quarters during morning shift change, blending into the corridor traffic of personnel starting their day. The observation deck was moderately populated, early risers watching the stars, a few diplomats preparing mentally for the day's negotiations, maintenance crews checking environment. Within 20 minutes, a Veltrian security officer discovered the princess and expressed concern about her overnight absence from quarters. She explained calmly that she'd been meditating on the peace negotiations, had lost track of time, and was perfectly safe. The security officer didn't look convinced but couldn't challenge her publicly without creating an incident. David received a message on his datapad. "Report to Ambassador Chen's office immediately." We need to discuss your extracurricular diplomatic activities. Oh good. The consequences were arriving right on schedule. He caught Sariel's eye across the observation deck. She nodded slightly, acknowledgement that they were about to face separate interrogations about last night's decisions, and mutual understanding that they'd both stick to the cultural exchange story. David headed to his supervisor's office, preparing explanations that were technically true while omitting the details Sariel had asked him to keep confidential. Ambassador Chen was waiting with the expression of someone who'd been awakened early to deal with problems and was distinctly not pleased about it. Mr. Mercer, would you like to explain why Princess Sariel Velkaris of the Veltrian Empire was seen leaving your quarters at 0600 this morning, by no fewer than 3 separate security cameras and approximately 7 witnesses? David had his story ready. Cultural Exchange Program, Ambassador. The princess requested informal instruction on human diplomatic approaches and philosophy. I agreed to provide context on our negotiation strategies and cultural values. It was arranged privately, to avoid the bureaucratic delays that might have prevented the exchange entirely. You arranged private meetings with foreign royalty without proper authorization, security clearance, or oversight protocols. I arranged educational discussions within the parameters of my authority as junior envoy assigned to facilitate interspecies understanding. The princess is officially here as a cultural observer. Facilitating her observations is arguably within my job description. Ambassador Chen stared at him for a long moment. That is the single most creative interpretation of your job description I have encountered in 20 years of diplomatic service. It's also completely transparent fiction. What actually happened, Mr. Mercer? And please do me the courtesy of honesty. I can't help you if I don't know what I'm dealing with. David made a decision about trust. Chen was hard but fair, and more importantly, he genuinely cared about successful negotiations more than political points. Ambassador, if I tell you the truth, it needs to stay confidential. There are safety concerns that could become significantly worse if the information spreads. Chen's expression shifted from annoyed to serious. Go on. David explained it all. The midnight knock, the scanner trap, the assassination concerns, the security sweep, the attempted access to her quarters. Chen listened without interrupting, and when David finished, the ambassador was quiet for a long moment. You provided shelter to a foreign princess fleeing assassination without reporting it through proper channels, filed no incident reports, and created a diplomatic fiction to cover it. Chen leaned back in his chair. That was extraordinarily reckless and potentially brilliant. If you're right about the threat, you saved her life and prevented a diplomatic catastrophe that would have destroyed these negotiations. If you're wrong, you've created a scandal that could still destroy the negotiations, but without the justification. I made the choice I thought was right at the time, sir. That's what concerns me. You're remarkably good at making those choices instinctively. Do you understand what you've started here? Princess Sariel will now be publicly associated with you. Her political enemies will examine you for leverage. Your background, your family, your entire life will be scrutinized for vulnerabilities they can exploit. You've put yourself in the center of Veltrian court intrigue through a simple act of compassion. Would you have preferred I turn her away when she asked for help? No, Chen sighed. But I would have preferred you call security immediately so we could provide proper protection through official channels. However, what's done is done, and your cultural exchange fiction is actually quite clever. We'll support it publicly. I'm assigning additional security monitoring to both you and the princess, discreetly but effectively. And Mr. Mercer. Yes, Ambassador. Next time royalty knocks on your door at midnight fleeing assassination, you call security before being heroic. Is that understood? Understood, Ambassador. David suspected he wouldn't actually follow that order in similar circumstances, but acknowledging it seemed diplomatically appropriate. He was dismissed and returned to his normal duties. which now included avoiding Veltrian delegation members who were giving him looks that ranged from suspicious to hostile. Apparently, Sariel's explanation of the cultural exchange had reached her people, and they were decidedly not pleased about the third princess consorting with low-ranking human diplomats. That evening, David was returning to his quarters after a long day of managing logistics for tomorrow's infrastructure development talks, when he found Sariel waiting in the corridor again. She looked less frightened than last night, but no less determined. "May we speak privately?" she asked formally, but her eyes conveyed urgency. David led her into his quarters. This was becoming a pattern, and sealed the door. "What's happened?" "My personal security team confirmed the threat. They found the person who placed the scanner trap in my quarters, a junior member of my brother's household, acting on orders from someone higher in the command chain. He's been detained by my people, but that means my brother knows I'm aware of the plot." "Is that better or worse for your safety?" "Strategically unclear. He can't easily try again now that I know and have taken precautions, but he also knows I know, which changes the political calculations. I'll be safer in some ways, more vulnerable in others." She paused, sitting in the desk chair without asking permission this time. "I wanted to thank you again, properly, not under emergency circumstances. You risked your career and possibly your safety to help me. That deserves more than hurried gratitude. I helped because you needed help. That's all the recognition required." There it is again, that impossibly simple morality that makes no sense in my world but perfect sense in yours. She studied him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about connections and choices and fate. I think I'd like to understand humans better. Your species approaches problems so differently than mine, with individual compassion instead of systematic calculation, with personal judgment instead of rigid protocol. Would you be willing to teach me? Actual cultural exchange, not just diplomatic fiction to cover political crisis." David considered the question and all its implications. The political complications, the career risks, the fact that getting genuinely close to someone whose family was actively trying to kill her seemed like poor life planning. That could be dangerous for both of us. Your political enemies will see it as vulnerability. Your family will see it as betrayal of Veltrian values. "Yes, but I'm tired of making every decision based on fear of political consequences. You helped me last night because it was right, despite the risks. I want to learn how to make decisions like that, to choose based on principle rather than calculation." She leaned forward slightly. "Teach me how to care about people more than outcomes. I think that might be the most valuable thing your species could offer mine." David made another decision that would probably complicate his life immeasurably. "All right. Real cultural exchange. But we do it properly. Official documentation, security oversight, no more midnight refuge in inadequate quarters unless absolutely necessary. Deal." Sariel extended her hand in the human gesture she'd clearly practiced. "Deal, David Mercer, though I reserve the right to seek refuge again if someone else tries to kill me. You've set a precedent for providing surprisingly effective shelter. That seems fair." They shook hands, and David noted the slightly warmer temperature of Veltrian skin, the different bone structure, the faint electrical sensation that was apparently normal for her species' physiology. "One more thing," Sariel said, not releasing his hand immediately. "I've never properly thanked a human before. Our cultures have such different protocols. Is there anything I should do beyond expressing gratitude verbally?" "Just the words are fine. We're not big on elaborate ritual thank yous. That seems insufficient for saving my life, but I'll defer to your cultural expertise." She finally released his hand. "I should return to my quarters, my actual quarters, which have now been swept thoroughly by security I actually trust. But I'll see you tomorrow. We can begin the cultural exchange formally." "Tomorrow works. I'll file the proper documentation tonight." After she left, David sat alone in his quarters thinking about Veltrian princesses and assassination plots, and the fact that he'd somehow agreed to teach an alien royal about human compassion and simple morality. His sister was never going to believe this when he finally got to tell her. His datapad chimed with a message from Ambassador Chen. Documentation for your cultural exchange program has been filed and approved. Try not to start an interstellar incident, or if you do, at least make it an interesting one. David sent back a simple acknowledgement, then pulled up the forms he'd need to complete to make their arrangement official. As he worked, he thought about Sariel's question about fate and connections, about the improbability of her choosing his door among all the possible refuges on the ship. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was just that sometimes people in crisis made good instinctive decisions about who to trust, and sometimes those decisions changed things in ways nobody anticipated. Either way, he was committed now. And somewhere in the Veltrian royal court, people who wanted Princess Sariel dead were recalculating their plans, factoring in the unexpected variable of one human junior envoy with simple morality